Well, welcome everyone. We are here for our Film and Flexibles webinar. This is part of our Wednesday webinar series, which is oddly being held on a Tuesday this time. We do apologize for any inconveniences around that. We had a technical glitch and we had to get that sorted out and give everyone an opportunity to join us so that they did not miss this great webinar. So thanks for your flexibility and joining us for the webinar today. For those of you who don't know exactly who the Recycling Partnership is, I will give a brief introduction, and we will also talk about some logistics today. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to chat those questions along, and Keisha will make sure that we receive them and get them answered for you. You also will have opportunities if you want to verbally ask your questions that you can do that as well. So we want you to make sure your voice is heard in this webinar and we get those questions answered. And so let's get started with a little bit of who we are for those of you who don't know about the Recycling Partnership. Here at the Recycling Partnership, we are really founded on the premise that only half of Americans can recycle, and we want to change that. We want to make sure that those Americans can recycle as easily as they can throw things away. And so each day to accomplish that, we are working together with communities and companies to help families in America recycle and do it well. How exactly do we do this? We increase access to recycling by bringing bins to homes. We increase capture by assisting communities with campaigns. And we improve quality through programs like our Feet on the Street program. And we do all of this thanks to our funding partners. We have many great corporate sponsors who are along this journey with us and helping make it happen. The great news is it's working. So we have already seen improvements, and we have reached a quarter of the US population with system-wide recycling solutions and improving our planet and improving people's lives. And we are experiencing powerful year-over-year growth. We've seen and helped with $32 million in infrastructure. We have over 900 community partners, 40 funding partners, and many robust best-in-class tools for communities, including our new Wednesday webinar series is one of those resources. So what are we talking about here today? Well, today we're really talking about film and flexibles. And for many of you, this is something that you hopefully feel very strongly about. As a recycling coordinator myself, I know that film and flexibles were a great challenge for me to overcome. And so I'm excited to share this resource with you here today. And we have with us Laura Thompson, who is really one of our experts on film and flexibles. And she's joined today to really share her knowledge. But before Laura unveils the curtain on the ever elusive film and flexibles world, I want to talk to you about messaging on these materials. First off, when we say film and flexibles, what exactly are we talking about? Well, we're talking about all the things that you see here. This whole mix-up of plastic bags, plastic wrap, bubble wrap, air pouches, you know, all of the things that are probably part of the bane of your existence if you are a recycling coordinator. But ultimately, as we're seeing changes in packaging, we're seeing more of these items come into the stream, and they're not going away. So we absolutely have to learn how to live with them. Now, what you see here is part of why these film and flexibles are such a challenge right now for the recycling industry. And for many of you, you're probably all too familiar with this image, and this is a star screen at a recycling processor or material recovery facility that has been entangled and jammed. And now it is the job of these two fine gentlemen to have to get it working again, which, as we all can imagine, is not a fun job. And so these materials really, they're putting pressure on our MRFs and therefore putting pressure on our communities to keep them out of the recycling stream. So why are residents placing film in their curbside recycling? What is happening there? Well, for one, it's plastic. And as we know, many items that are plastic go into the recycling bin because, well, plastic is recyclable, right? And in addition to that, to make it even more confusing, what we see is that on a lot of this material, there is the recycling symbol or there is a message telling folks to recycle the item. And of course, this increases the confusion. And so it's our greatest challenge as those working in municipal programs or working with the resident community to make sure that residents are clear on what can actually be done with this material. And to do this, what do we need to tell residents? Well, it's not one message. So if we tell folks simply not to bag their recyclables, they may not understand that that also means no plastic bags, and vice versa. So if we tell them no plastic bags, that doesn't necessarily translate to them understanding that their material should not be bagged either. And so we have to make sure we're getting into the resident's head as much as possible, understanding their behavior and creating a message that is really tailored to that. You'll also see here a icon for the no plastic wrap. And just for your information, all of these icons are available for you to utilize when you're creating campaign materials. You can access them on the Recycling Partnerships webpage. But the real clear point here is that it is not one message, that we really need to make sure we are messaging on all of these types of behavior. And remember, what often looks like resistance is actually a lack of clarity. So we need that clear message to help change the behavior. And what does that clear message look like? What we have here is our top issue messaging. With this, you'll notice that there is an emphasis on one of those behaviors. And so looking at the first one, you see it's about not bagging your recyclables. And in this instance, this can be a really powerful message for two reasons. One, well, it's one ask and it's clear, it's consistent. But additionally, when you have folks that are no longer bagging material, you have now freed that material up, allowing it to go back into the stream and hopefully be captured and turned into something new through your MRF. Now you'll also notice on that piece, there is a message about returning plastic bags to retailers. So again, getting at the behavior, there's a question asking, are you collecting your recyclables in a bag? Well, empty those contents into the cart and return the plastic bag to retailers. So giving those extra steps and showing a bag that is not the same as the one that's in the cart. So really letting folks know it's not just about not bagging recyclables, it's also about not placing bags in that cart. And then secondly, you'll see the message about, don't trash recyclables. And this is telling folks, when you place those items in a bag, you are essentially turning them into trash in many cases, as that material cannot be captured and processed. And the last one that we're looking at is the no plastic bags or wrap in your cart. And again, this is the one strong message of no plastic bags or wrap, instead of also telling folks, not to bag their recycling and no plastic bags and wrap. This is that top issue. It's about what you're experiencing in your community and what is the greatest challenge to you. And that's where your top issue should focus. So is it bag material? Is it plastic bags? Is it wrap? Which one do you want to focus on? Now, there's of course placement where you want to have multiple messages. And so this is a info card with the accepted materials. And you'll notice on these info cards that we have messages that are, you know, do not bag recyclables along with a no plastic bags or wrap icon. And we also have the do not recyclables that is emphasized even more clearly. So you have it in a different color and you have it placed differently so that it can really stand out. And you can let folks know that these items are not accepted, and you also want to make sure your recycling is not bagged. Now, looking at store take back. So many of us want to encourage recycling as much as possible and as often as possible. We also know that we have a good amount of wish cyclers out there who are putting items in their curbside recycling because they want it to be recycled. So in the case of those wish cyclers, we want to give them an outlet where that material can actually be recycled. But we want to make sure that this message is really clear. If we're going to tell folks that they can recycle their bags and film, make it clear that it is at store drop-off, that it is not something that can be recycled in your bin. And that sounds really straightforward, but sometimes that message can get lost easily. And you can see here, looking at the material on the right side, telling folks recycle, clean, and dry plastic bags and film. At the top of that piece can be slightly confusing because all they're seeing there is that that material is recyclable. Instead, if you have a message that starts off with letting folks know to drop off the material at a participating store, and that those bags or wraps are not actually accepted in the curbside recycling cart, you're hopefully now messaging and correcting any behavior change that needs to happen. You'll notice on both these pieces, you also can find the how to recycle label, which is a great label that's being used out there on increasing amounts of packaging, and it tells folks to take that material to store drop off. Now, while store take back messaging is really important to help us capture this material in one form or another, we also need to understand when and where it is appropriate. So store take back messaging is not going to resonate with all of your residents. You have some of those residents out there who are really interested in taking that next step, going the extra mile. So determine where are those residents getting their information in your program and message to them there. So it may be they're getting that information online, they're getting it through an FAQ. They're the ones who are going to be looking for that detailed information. And that's where you want to tell them about store drop-off. However, if you are in a program that is incredibly challenged because of film, you might want to think about how you message about keeping plastic bags and film out of your recycling cart. So before you would get started, if you are going to message on store drop-off, make sure that it is a viable option for your community. And you can use, there's a really great tool on the WRAP webpage where you can go in and actually put in your location information, and from there find out where there are locations near you to drop off this material. So make sure if you're gonna message on it, the outlet is there for your residents. Really important, and a lot of great resources on this webpage. Again, though, know your audience. So who is going to look for store drop-off? Is it going to be that large audience, that those number ones who are really looking for a one simple message? Probably not, but it might be some of your 5s and your 50s. And so for those number ones, where you may message something through a more of a mass media outlet, store drop-off is probably not going to be the best message to utilize. Instead, just utilize a message to let folks know to keep that material out of the cart one way or another. And a great example of this was a campaign being done in the Portland metro area, and it's Recycle or Not is the campaign. And you'll notice here that they're taking the steps to tell folks that these plastic bags and wrap are not recyclable at home, and that they can put them in their trash. Go ahead, throw them in their trash. And again, it's about you being able to make that judgment call on knowing who your audience is and knowing where your program stands. So if you are experiencing consistent rejections at your MRF due to high levels of film and wrap in your stream, and you need to get it out in order to get that good material processed, then choose a message that is right for your community. All right, so that is what I have for you in messaging, and hopefully it helped provide a little guidance, a little clarity. Again, you can find a lot of resources on our webpage to create materials. And I want to allow Laura to come in with all of that great behind the scenes information on the plastics film world. But before we do, I can see there's quite a few questions that have come in. So Keisha, do you have any questions that you want to share with me?
So Alita, Jessica had a question. Have you found residents getting confused with the images since the examples shown have products within the wrap?
Yeah, and we'll have to go back to which one that was on. On these, yeah, and so I think that's a great point here, where in this case, you're showing the product, but you're also showing that there's material inside. Now, these materials are not created by Recycling Partnership, I should say, and so these materials have been created by another organization, and we typically would not put the product inside of the actual packaging, but if that was their choice, I'm not sure exactly the reasoning behind it. And unfortunately can't tell you exactly whether or not residents have been confused on these specific materials because they weren't created by the Recycling Partnership.
Okay. And then Ben asked, specific to in-store take-back programs, such as Kroger is phasing out their use of plastic bags. Do you see the weakening of store take-back programs?
So I think that actually would be a great question for Laura, and I'm going to give her the opportunity to jump in on that one.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I'm going to talk a fair amount about store drop-off in general. We see this as a really important channel, even though we know it's difficult to message, and we do see fairly low participation, but that's one of the reasons why messaging is so important. To the question at hand around bag bans, we have seen some evidence that that is affecting some stores where they feel like if they're not able to distribute bags, they shouldn't feel compelled to collect bags. And we're actually troubled by that because we see a real need for the retailers to stay involved and to keep collecting, because these collection materials, as you can see, go way beyond just plastic bags. It includes things like the bread bags, dry cleaning bags, and other materials. So we are trying to get that message to retailers, working in different locations and through different channels, that we are encouraging them to continue to use collection sites and support collection sites. We also, hope to get that message out through different channels. The Sustainable Packaging Coalition, through their How to Recycle program, which you can see represented on these slides. A lot of the retailers are starting to sign up for that program so that they can label their own private brands. And so we're trying to encourage them, if they're going to use the label, all the more reason why they need to support the channel. So great question. And we do see some evidence that the bag bans are actually hurting collection.
Yeah. And I'm going to make mention of one more comment from Tanya Randall, because she's referring to the wrap poster that was shown in the previous slides. But those posters were, I guess, designed by Tanya's organization, and she's also noted in the comment that you can reach out to her if you need clarity on the use of the actual wrap poster and why they were created in the first place. So she's also in the comments in the chat for anyone that's interested.
Nice, appreciate that. And I just wanted to also share, there's some great back and forth going. We also have some folks, it looks like with the Recycle or Not campaign, sharing, why they utilized the materials the way they did and the images that they did. So that is really excellent. If you guys want to take a look in the chat and see those messages, also see some folks sharing what's worked for them in their program. This is all excellent, beautiful information, and really the point of these webinars. Again, just want to emphasize it is all about when it comes to messaging on these materials, it's about what really is going to work best for your community and where you currently stand with this material, because it is really a new space and it's a very challenging space for folks. So I know that we all want to dig into what Laura has to offer us. So I am going to move now to that and let you take on over, Laura.
Super. We can go right to the next slide, and I will start really just by trying to level set with some terminology. This one here, yeah. So we've been using the terms film and flexibles, and just to get everybody on the same page about how we're using this terminology in a broad sense throughout the rest of this presentation. If I'm talking about film, I'm really talking about a lot of the examples you saw on those posters, where it's a single layer plastic film of either low density or high density PE, or sometimes people will just refer to these as the wrap materials that can be collected at the store. And I know our neighbors to the north often refer to these as soft plastics, and I've also heard the term sort of stretch plastics. And in some cases they do stretch, and in some cases they shrink. So we think of that again as that store drop-off collectible materials. When I refer to flexibles, there's a whole host, as I'm sure you're aware, of flexible packaging materials that are not these single layer materials. They're multi-layered, multiple different types of plastics that are laminated or extruded together for different, properties like oxygen barriers and so forth. And so because they are multiple materials, you can't just throw them in with the PE and expect them to get recycled. They actually serve as contaminants to those streams. So they have to be collected differently and processed differently than what you see in the store drop-off channel. We've also put polypropylene film in that category for the same reason. You can't process it the same way as PE. So that might seem a little bit confusing that a polypropylene film is considered flexible, but it's really that distinction that it's not PE. So if you look at the pie chart, this is roughly the distribution of what's being generated here in the States. And later in the presentation, I'll show you a little bit about what we think is showing up in the household, because a lot of this material goes to commercial institutional uses, that consumers never see and that you wouldn't expect to see in the household. So just wanted to level set there. Also want to talk about film. When you talk about the marketability of film, there's lots of different grades of film, and in the marketplace, they're not all seen the same way. You've got everything from what we would think of as sort of the back of the store, if you're at a retailer, shrink wrap kind of categories. And that's what has the most value. It's clean, it's dry, it's clear, and you actually see that marketing at a positive value. And they grade sort of this clean and dry film in different categories, if it has colors or if it has mixtures of colors and so forth. What you see out there in the consumer space, post-consumer sources, agricultural film is actually collected and processed pretty extensively. It tends to be that monolayer, good quality film with no ink on it. There's grocery store film, the store drop-off materials that we're talking about, clean and dry, again, still seeing some value in the marketplace. And then what most of you are probably familiar with is the MRF film, which has been collected at the MRF either intentionally or unintentionally because of the wish cyclers, which because it's at the MRF is now often cross-contaminated and causing the problems and challenges that Alita spoke of earlier. So just to be clear, you know, when we're talking about film, there are different grades and different sources of it, and you want to keep that in mind as if you're talking to somebody about, you know, marketing your film, you know, which film category are you talking about? When in this space, we've learned that there's a lot of different views about what we should do here, and sort of this tug of war of, should we capture everything together? Are we talking about just PE alone? Do we capture it at the bin because you can get more, or should it really be going to drop off? And depending on where you are in the supply chain, your view may be very different. And so we're seeing these sort of tug of wars going on around, we think we know the answer, it should be X, or, you know, that's, other opinions are saying, no, that's not the way to do it. And so we're trying to wade our way through what is the best way to collect the most materials at the highest quality, because all of these choices will impact both the quantity of material we get as well as the quality of material. Go to the next slide. So yeah, as I mentioned, depending on who you are, you may have a very, very different view. So if you're operating a MRF, most of the time you're just thinking of this material as contamination, that it's clogging your screens, as we saw in the earlier picture. It could be cross-contaminating other materials where it didn't sort properly, so now it's in your paper bale or other material bales where it doesn't belong. And because these materials do tend to get dirty, right now there's very little market for MRF film. I said no market there, which is a little bit of an overstatement. There are a couple of MRFs that are still able to move film, but it's a very, very small market. These materials in the past were often exported, and because of all of the dynamics with China and other export markets, we've seen that MRF film market pretty much go away. Brands have a very different perspective about these materials. Many brands are continuing to put their products in these materials, and so they want to see them be recycled. And they have a lot of skin in the game around labeling and actually wanting to get materials back so that they can also use it for recycled content. So their view is very different than where the MRFs are. They would like to see MRFs be able to handle these materials and get them back to market. And then if you're a consumer, you're kind of wondering what's going on. What do I do? You know, some are, you know, actively putting these in the bin when they shouldn't, and some are thinking it's too inconvenient to go to the stores. So just really dynamic space on how to message, how to change behaviors, and how to treat these materials. I mentioned the brand perspective, and you've probably seen some of this coming from large corporate companies. A lot of the consumer packaging goods are making really bold commitments towards reusable and recyclable materials. And we're seeing still a heavy growth of film and flexible packaging. So you're seeing these goals being set with very little collection infrastructure. So there's a lot of work to be done here to try to meet these goals. And as I mentioned before, they're also setting recycled content targets. So they see value in these materials and they really want to keep them in the supply chain. We can go to the next slide. We've already showed you this slide around contamination, that this is often what the problem is, that they're wrapping screens, and I mentioned before, getting into other products like paper bales and degrading the quality of those materials as well. So the MRFs really see these as problematic materials. It's certainly not the only contaminant at a MRF, but it's a major contaminant and often cited as the biggest problem at the sorting facilities. So to solve these challenging problems, we really need to work together. There's not going to be likely one solution that solves all of these problems. There are some interesting experiments, if you will, going on in different regions. And so what we've decided to do at the Recycling Partnership is to form a task force. You might have noticed that on the first slide, that we have initiated a work stream that I have the pleasure of leading that we are calling the Film and Flexibles Task Force. We're actively getting funders behind this to do work in this space, and within a couple of weeks we hope to announce who those funding partners are, and you'll get a little bit of a sneak peek here today around some of the work that we plan to do. In essence, we need to collaborate. There's a lot of good work going on by other organizations in this space. You saw mention of the WRAP program and some of the work that they're doing around store drop-off. There's work by other organizations, the Sustainable Packaging Coalition I mentioned, APR rather, and others. So we're really trying to work with other organizations and complement their efforts without duplicating efforts. And you'll see more about that as I go on. This is just to level set and give everybody some insight to what we think the current recycling rates are. There's actually not a lot of data available out there. These are numbers that I pulled from a report that was done on behalf of the Closed Loop Foundation, where they were looking at infrastructure needs for capturing these materials. And the best we can tell from that data is that only about 4% of residential film is being collected. So this is the participants that are actually going to the store drop-off channel and recovering materials. The commercial side is much higher. I think we've seen this in other materials like cardboard and others, that you see higher participation at the commercial level. But even in that case, we're only seeing about 20% collection there. And when you add it all up, roughly 15% of all film. And this is, again, just the film number. It doesn't address the flexible packaging side. So really low participation, lots of opportunity and room for improvement in recovering these materials. So I mentioned before, we've got these massive quantities of materials being generated, but we don't know how much of it's in the household versus commercial. We are starting to try to measure this, and until we can actually get on the ground and measure through various capture studies, I did an exercise where I actually tried to estimate what we think is in the home. So we can go to the next slide. This just gives you a taste of some of the data. This again came from that same report I mentioned before. The data is actually generated by the Flexible Packaging Association, where they provided estimates as to what's being generated by different formats. And then I literally used my best guess to estimate how much of this do we think is in the household versus what is in the commercial stream to come up with these numbers that more or less coalesce with what we think is in the household. And I wanted to point out here that everybody talks about, bag bans and reducing bag use. Stay on the slide for a second. Bags are clearly a major portion of the stream. You can see that 700 million pounds of retail bags. But if you look at things like multi-pack bundling, wrap around you see around products, those are equal, if not greater volume when combined. And so that's why when stores eliminate their drop-off program, they're hurting more than just bag collection, but all these other materials that are available for collection as well. Now I can go ahead. So when we did this estimate in the split, I showed you the numbers for film. I also did it for flexible packaging. There's also trash bags out there in the household. And so when we add up all of these materials, we think there's roughly 100 pounds per household every year as part of the mix. And we have some limited capture data that supports these numbers, and we're actively going after more data. If you guys through municipal sorts or characterization studies have data that you're willing to share, I'm eager to get at that data. So it would be great if you could share that data with us if you have actual film numbers on what you're seeing through your municipal capture studies or characterization studies.
This is such great information, Laura, and we do have a few questions.
Sure.
Are coming in. I want to make sure we get to those while they're fresh in people's minds, and I think a good amount of it will actually continue to be covered in your presentation. But I wanted to point out, we have folks asking, what are grocery stores doing with the film collected at their locations? And what's happening outside of the U.S. with film and flexibles?
Yep, no, those are great questions. I will talk a little bit about the markets, and that's actually coming up in just a couple of slides here.
Great.
So I'll touch on that with slides. In terms of what's going on in Europe, we do know that they have higher rates, and they actually have some more innovation going on, especially related to flexible packaging. So I can touch on that a little bit too, but remind me to come back to the Europe if I don't touch on it naturally.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. And we are going to move on.
Okay. So here's, speaking of markets, some of the end markets for clean and dry films. So this is typically where the store drop-off film is flowing now. Many of you have probably heard of Trex. They are one of the major producers of composite materials or decking, what you'd see for outdoor decking or walkways. They are not the only one in that space of composite materials. There's also emerging technology where people are making composite railroad ties. So you can see the list of companies below that. Somebody actually asked the head of the webinar, who these companies were and where they're located. I can give you a few locations based on some of the companies here on this slide, but Trex is in Nevada and Virginia. AERT is one of their competitors. They're in Arkansas. If you look at the bag markets, Novolex is the big player for making retail shopping bags. They are also a very major consumer of the store drop-off channel materials. They are located in Indiana. And I would point out that there's an excellent resource that More Recycling has put together called plasticsmarkets.org. So it's 2 words, plastics with an S, markets with an S.org. And they actually have a search tool where you can look and see who buys and trades these materials. So this is really just a high-level snapshot. The 2 major markets are bags and composites, and we're starting to see some emerging markets with new technology. So you've probably heard of chemical recycling in some of your learnings, and I'll put in a plug here. We're actually going to be doing a webinar with the closed loop partners in just a few weeks to talk more about chemical recycling. So I encourage you to look for that and to join that if you can. This is another piece of data that came from More, where they did some estimates on market potential, that if we used just 10% PCR in trash bags and 20% in retail bags, which is easily proven. I think the Novolex company cites that they are averaging about 30% in their bags. So this is very possible to do. And if more people would buy these and mandate these, we would see just bags alone could consume 1 billion pounds of these materials. So the market potential is large, but this isn't the actual market demand for these materials right now. So I want to be clear on that. This isn't the current usage, but it is possible.
Great information here, Laura. And for those of us who aren't aware, what exactly is PCR?
That is post-consumer resin. So 10% post-consumer content or post-consumer resin, sorry.
Great, thank you.
Again, this is just talking about capacity. There's some estimates that if the railroad tie market continues to grow, railroad ties alone could be another 1 billion pounds of consumption. They are, trying to penetrate the markets, competing against wood ties, and they see great potential for this market space. So again, just to give you a sense of where we're seeing potential growth and really good fit for use, that the railroad ties are very much like a Trex composite, where you're blending materials together for durable use. One of the questions that we're starting to get from many of our stakeholders is this notion of chemical recycling and where does energy fit in the landscape. And we're trying to get involved in some of this education. We're still learning as we go. We know that some of this technology is in place today, where people are converting plastics to fuels. And I just want to point out today, and we can talk about it more on August 14th, that pyrolysis, when they're talking about converting these materials to liquid fuels, this is very different than your classic sort of waste to energy, where you're incinerating directly, mixed waste. Pyrolysis is a very different technology. They're actually oftentimes making a low sulfur fuel, which is actually better for the environment than virgin fuel. So we're really on a learning curve here, trying to understand the landscape, where this is allowed and permitted in certain regions and not in others. And I mentioned that policymakers don't necessarily understand this. So some states don't understand this technology, and it wouldn't be allowed for siting in some locations. So this is very much an evolving space. And if you want to learn more about that, again, the plug for the webinar on the 14th. This speaks to many of the issues I just said around energy recovery. Is it's not just one thing. You see pyrolysis, sometimes people converting plastics to fuel pellets for incineration in something like a kiln, and then you have waste to energy. And for many stakeholders, this is seen as much more preferable than landfill or unmitigated litter that can end up as ocean debris. And so some constituents are embracing these technologies and seeing them as preferable to landfill. The other image here on the screen here talks about recycling. Just like recycling isn't one thing, you've got closed loop and open loop recycling materials. Energy recovery is not one thing either. So just wanted to plant that seed. There were a lot of questions about store drop-off and how the film is behaving. I'll talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons here, and what we see as sort of the potential for store drop-off. We really see this as continuing to be an important channel. It is the best way to collect materials now. If we can get participation up, it will continue to be so. It is just the PE materials, so it does still have market viability. And like we saw there on the previous slides, some really good market potential if we can see the demand supporting the supply. I'm going to show you a few slides here around some estimates and some limited data on what we have on the channel.
Yeah, so great. And I noticed we have some conversation going about store drop-off and what can actually be taken to store drop-off. And I think for many folks, and because of what the stores are messaging or what they have understood as accepted, they believe that it is the plastic bags that go to store drop-off. But really, Laura, what we're discovering is that there's more materials that can be taken to store drop-off.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, some of the images you saw earlier that came from the WRAP website, they'll give you a broader list of accepted materials. There are some grocery stores that still limit their messaging to bags only. But the fact of the matter is that these other materials like bread bags and dry cleaning bags, they are the same material. And you're seeing more packaging now receiving that store drop-off label. There's even a pouch that is all polyethylene and is compatible for processing with that stream. And so you're starting to see even some pouches being labeled that way. This is likely to cause some consumer confusion until those get more in the mainstream. But there are a whole host of materials that are compatible with just that PE stream. So it is clean and dry. We're starting to see more and more use of the label, encouraging people to look at their labels. We do know that the campaigns work. Again, the WRAP program has done several campaigns where they've done education outreach around these materials in particular. And we've seen them double collection with the effect of a campaign. So there's a great case study that's available that talks about Vancouver, Washington. I think that was their last big campaign where they actually saw they were able to measure an increase in collection of a doubling. We are working on some estimates as to how far you could push the channel. We'd like to see way more material going through that channel, and we're going to be, like I said, working with retailers to try to support that collection. Because of these challenges we see now, there is low participation. We think that's in great part due to low consumer awareness and confusion. Some of the inconsistencies we just talked about, that some say bags only, and we know that more materials are available. There's not a lot of data, and so we are always at the partnership hungry for data and good metrics. So we intend to do some more data collection. And I should mention here, one of the keys that why grocery stores are such a good part of this system is that the grocery stores often have distribution centers where they can take these materials back. So they're backhauling their recyclables already with their corrugate. Their back of store film, and therefore they have a system to take back their store drop-off film as well. Whereas sometimes in smaller stores or even smaller chains, if they don't have that distribution center sort of hub and spoke system, they may not have the capabilities to do this. So it is complex, there are challenges, but we think it has great potential.
Laura, really quickly on that reference to backhauling at stores, do we have information, or do you have any information that can tell us the extent that stores go to for backhauling, and what the rate of distribution is for that, or what's the rate of backhauling for stores?
Well, I don't know the answer to that specific question. I mean, the best we have, like I said, is only about 4% is being collected, and it's hard to say. I do think they have more capacity, that they could take more if we could get more consumer participation. So if they're already hauling, it's not heavy material, it's bulky material, but they're making routine backhaul visits. So I think the infrastructure is there. And again, the website that Alita pointed out earlier on the WRAP database, that lists the stores that are actively participating and continue to collect those materials. That list is not 100% comprehensive. There are stores that are not listed there. And if you know of a store, they're constantly updating that database, and you can just go on their website and say, hey, this store's collecting too, you should go check them out. So we encourage that kind of support too for the database. So here, this slide here talks about materials recovery for the future. This is a really interesting project that's going on in Birdsboro, Pennsylvania, where they are proactively collecting film and flexibles, not just film, but flexibles as well, at the curb to try to do this as what I call sort of a massive experiment. This does take place in some places in Europe, and so we're trying to replicate this capability here in the States, and we will be working with them to help with their collection infrastructure to support this initiative. So what happened was several companies got together to, Alita, make sure you plug your computer in. Several companies got together to invest in modifying the MRF specifically to allow for collection so that you wouldn't see those screens wrapping, and so that they would be able to separate the film from the paper and be able to create a new bale that they're calling R-Flex, or recycled flexibles. That equipment is up and running at the Total Recycle MRF in Birdsboro. They are still troubleshooting it and tweaking it, and will begin in the not too distant future to start telling communities to go ahead and put those materials in. They have a very controlled, phased-in approach. This is a learning curve for everybody, but we're really excited about this initiative to test the capabilities of, if you design for this and you put in the proper equipment, can you actually collect these materials curbside? So this is a really interesting innovation to see, will this work? Can we collect materials this way and get them back into market? So we're very excited to follow that one. Another initiative that you may have heard of in this space, Dow and the Reynolds company, using the Hefty brand, came together to do a pilot several years ago, and now they've launched it on a commercial scale in several communities, Omaha, Nebraska, you can see Boise, and Cobb County, Georgia, where they have a specially brand bag, this orange bag, and they're educating consumers that if you put difficult to recycle plastics in this bag, we will convert them into energy. And so they collect the materials. It can be film, it can be flexibles, it can be polystyrene, your forks, your cups, other materials that wouldn't otherwise be recyclable in your bin. If you put them in the orange bag, we will collect them. You put the bag in your recycling bin, it goes to the MRF. The MRF hand grabs the orange bags out, and they get processed separately. And again, this is not direct waste to energy. This is typically done through a pyrolysis plant. And so we're watching this to see, is this going to be a collection channel? And both the MRFF initiative and this Hefty Energy Bag, we think are very interesting, because this could be the future type of infrastructure that is used to support what we call broadly chemical recycling. So we think these are really important initiatives to understand better and to track. And again, we're looking to partner with some of these communities to get at data, ultimately, so that as community leaders, if you come to the recycling partnership and say, what should I do with our film? We will have more data and more advice in the future around what works, what it costs, how it works, and what you can expect if you collect through different channels. So we do have a long journey ahead. Like I said, the MRFF, it's the only MRF in the country that we're aware of that's modifying the way that they are and purposely telling communities to go ahead and put these materials in the bin. We know some communities in the past were saying you can recycle in the bin, and many of them have changed course because of the lack of markets and complaints from MRFs. And so, you know, this is a journey that we need to navigate together. And so we're working on doing just that through our Film and Flexibles Task Force. So this is what we've proposed to our funders, and you know, you're sort of getting a sneak peek here at the work that we have planned as part of our Film and Flexibles Task Force. Like I said, we intend to do capture rate studies, some audits of the stored drop-off bales to really understand what consumers are bringing back. We want to do some consumer insight research on recycling behaviors, you know, who recycles at the store and why, and probably just as importantly, who doesn't recycle at the store and why. Is it because of lack of education or lack of convenience? And then we really, like I mentioned before, are starting to have conversations with retailers to better understand why they collect, what their limits are, and really help expand that store drop-off channel we think if they see the value of it for various reasons beyond just the value of the materials, but consumer loyalty or expectations, support of the store drop-off label, etc. The more that they understand what their value proposition is, the more support we think they'll bring to the channel. We intend to do work with these 3 different pilot programs that I talked about, and I shouldn't call a city a pilot, but it's a very good learning opportunity for us to look at store drop-off. So we've been invited by the city of Seattle to help them with store drop-off to improve that channel. I mentioned the MRFF in Birdsboro, and we do intend to look at the energy bag program, which is sometimes referred to as Recover More Plastics. That's kind of a more generic name for the energy bag program. So we haven't selected a community for that yet, but we will be probably in the next few weeks or so trying to identify where we want to work on energy bag. We have, well, we can go on. I don't need to talk about demand champs. You can go.
Laura, we still have a few minutes, so if you want to.
Okay. So many of you may have heard of the APR's Demand Champions program. This is really an end market program where they're encouraging companies to sign up and use more recycled content of plastic materials. And so we've been in conversations with them around potentially creating a segment of that program that would be specifically around creating demand for film. So that has not been done publicly, but we're in conversations around, is that a good fit? And we see some good alignment there. So we will likely be announcing that at some time in the future. Again, not just demand for recycled plastic, but demand for recycled plastic that comes from these film materials in particular. So just encouraging the use of those materials and supporting the end markets. I did get a few questions ahead of time from a couple of the people that had registered. I think I addressed most of them around where it is. One of them was about it. Will these markets return? We're still in pretty challenging times because of the lack of export markets, but we are seeing some investments going in both what I call the traditional mechanical recycling, a lot of innovations going on around chemical recycling. And again, we see these materials, especially flexible packaging, as very likely candidates for the sort of the evolving technology around mechanical or chemical recycling, because they do tend to be multiple materials, which make them challenging for the mechanical stream. Any other questions that are coming in through the chat line that we can try to address in the next few minutes?
Yeah. Quite a few. I'll let you go, Keisha. I know you've been doing a great job monitoring those as they come in.
So I'll go through a few that we have here. I'll start with Lindsay, who's patiently waiting. For those programs that do recycle plastic bags curbside, is there any specific or effective language that we recommend?
Alita, I'll let you take that one if they're purposely doing it curbside.
Oh, interesting. Great. And where is your program located? Just out of curiosity. I know that'll be great information for you to know as well, Laura.
So that might be a question that we can address later on at the end. So I was just putting it out there.
I think it's Emmett County, Northern Michigan, and I'm guessing that's a dual stream program, not a single stream. Is that a fair? Yes, dual stream. So that's a little unique too.
Yeah. So we at the Recycling Partnership do not have anything specific to message on encouraging plastic bags to go into the stream, because that's not something that many of our partner communities are experiencing or are in the middle of taking on. What I would recommend is we do have our campaign builder where you're able to tailor those materials, and we also have those available as art files. So you could utilize any of those and of course include plastic bags in your plastic categories.
Okay. And then going back to Laura, I believe this is a question for you. Pam Egan noted that she was told previously that if it's crunchy plastic rather than stretchy, it's considered film. But we displayed a plastic or chip bag in the slide previously. So could you clarify on that? how would we differentiate between those?
Yeah, the crinkle test is a really good one. And you can all go home and try to do this. If you crinkle sort of a grocery bag or a dry cleaning bag that's sort of soft plastic, it'll make a sound, but it's a very soft sound. And then if you can find something that's made out of PET or other plastics and crinkle it, it has a very distinct sort of louder sound, which was kind of funny in the reference to the chip bag thing. That certain materials, they have that different sound as you crumple them. So the softer plastics tend to have no sound. And you can also do a thumb test. If you can like stretch it with your thumb and it stretches, that's likely PE. Also, I mean, if it's a 2 or a 4 and it's labeled that way, that's polyethylene. So the crunchy stuff wouldn't have a 2 or a 4, the more crinkly, crunchy. And then a chip bag is actually multiple layers, and it's not just polyethylene, so that would fall on the crinkly side. And many of you might have heard of the Sun Chips initiative years ago when they tried to make a PLA bag from the corn-based plastics, and that plastic also had a distinct sound. It's not PE, and consumers actually didn't like that crinkly sound in their chip bags, so that would fall in that flexibles category of multi-layer materials that are not currently recyclable through the store drop-off. Cereal bags, that's a great question. Cereal bags come up a lot in these questions. I meant to adjust that earlier. Some are and some aren't. And this is one of these tricky things when a whole category where you have some that are okay and some that are not. We see the same thing with some frozen foods like frozen vegetables. Sometimes you'll see a polyethylene bag and sometimes you don't. And this is part of the challenge and why we think labeling is so important. And for those recyclers that are really aggressive, teaching them these tips around what is recyclable and what is not. So I just saw this question for clarifying the loud crinkle. The really loud ones are not recyclable in store drop-off. The softer plastics won't make as much noise, and those are the ones that are recyclable. So I would encourage you to try the test at home. Find something crinkly like a chip bag or like flour wrap. You see the clear film around flowers in stores sometimes. That is not recyclable. And you see it on soap sometimes or candy wrap. That crinkly plastic is no good. I just saw 6-pack rings come in. That 6-pack rings do tend to be polyethylene, but because they have a biodegradable additive, we do not want to see those in the store drop-off channel because that biodegradable additive would make the subsequent product that gets recycled also have that biodegradable feature in it. So that is not encouraged to be put in the store drop-off channel. So great question on 6-pack rings.
Laura, what are open loop recyclable materials, and can you give an example of that?
Sure. So that's a terminology that life cycle practitioners use, this notion of closed loop versus open loop. If something is closed loop, you can think of it as like bottle to bottle, that you're closing that loop, and it's probably like truly circular, if you will, that it's, or more circular, if you will, that you've made a product back into what it was before. In open loop, you take that same material and you're recycling it, but not necessarily back into a package. So maybe a bottle to something like carpet, or a bottle to a fleece jacket. So those would be more open loop type of recycling systems. That absolutely still keeps it in the circular economy, but it's a little more open loop rather than the closed.
Great. And we have more questions coming in. And so what I want to say to those folks is please feel free to reach out to myself, to Laura. You can find our contact information at the end of this presentation. And I am going to also copy all of the questions that are being posted so that we do have those. And as I said, reach out. We'll be happy to answer them. I want to share with folks before we wrap up that you will be receiving a follow-up email from this webinar, and we are asking that you share your input. This is a new space, film and flexibles. This is a challenging space, and this is a growing space. And so as we are trying to make discoveries, we hope that you join us in that journey and share your input with us to help really shape and create the landscape of film and flexibles in America. So you'll get that survey link. It's a quick survey, about 5 questions should take you 2 minutes, and your input is really valuable to us, and we do appreciate that. And we appreciate everyone joining us today for the webinar and for all of the really great feedback and conversations that have been happening around this. I think here at the Recycling Partnership, we see that this is a hot topic and want to continue exploration in the film and flexible space. And so hope you'll join us along that journey. And you can find this webinar. It will be located on our Wednesday webinar webpage, where you can find the presentation along with the webinar recording. And thanks all for joining us today, and let you go back to your Tuesday. Hope everyone has a great week and a great weekend ahead.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.